This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and their guests only. The content here should not be taken as medical advice and is for informational purposes only. And because each person is so unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions. Welcome to Once Shattered, Picking Up the Pieces, a podcast devoted to changing the way eating disorders and mental illness are viewed in our society. With your hosts, Jack and Linda Major and Ellen Bennett. Today's guest is Tamie Gangloff. Tamie is a marriage and family therapist and marketing professional with a specialty in the treatment of eating disorders, addiction, and trauma. Tamie is an advocate with the Eating Disorders Coalition, president of Southwest Philly IAEDP, International Association of Eating Disorders Professionals, and is on the board of the International Society on Scoliosis, Orthopaedic, and Rehabilitation Treatment. Tamie earned her master's degree in clinical psychology from Antioch University, Santa Barbara, and over the past 15 years has held many positions in the eating disorder field, including private practice, outreach, clinician in residential treatment, and is currently the director of field marketing and events at Alsana. Tamie utilizes her personal and professional experience to help others and advocate for change and offer support to others.
Welcome to Once Shattered, Picking Up the Pieces, Thriving After Scoliosis, Alcoholism, and Eating Disorders with Tamie Gangloff. Tamie's story can't help but inspire and energize you, no matter what physical, mental, or emotional challenge you might be facing. She just celebrated 25 years of sobriety, and that is certainly something to celebrate. Tamie will be with us to share her journey in just a moment. But first, I need to introduce my co-host, my husband, my very best guy, best husband, soulmate, and our dear friend and fellow advocate, Ellen Bennett.
Hello, everyone. Glad you could be with us again today.
Hello. I'm so excited to be here today. I know our guest. Woo!
Well, I usually start with a quote, but today, instead of a quote, I decided to read the definition of the word resilience because I think this really describes our special guest. The definition of resilience is the capacity of a person to maintain their core purpose and integrity in the face of dramatically changed circumstances, the ability to not only overcome setbacks, but to also move forward. I'm going to let Ellen be the first to welcome Tamie because they have a very special and sacred connection, which they will share with us a little further into the podcast. And we have to do this podcast chronologically because the rest of us need to hear some of Tamie's story before.
That's going to be really hard for me to do, but I can handle it. I can do it.
We know you can.
Okay. Tamie Gangloff, we are so excited to have you here. This is going to be an awesome conversation. And welcome.
Oh, Tamie, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you with us today. And I will try to hold Ellen down if need be. But,
you can't hold Ellen down. It's really an honor to be here.
I know. But we are all so excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here and honored to be here with everyone.
So, Tamie, I watched your video recently that you put up on LinkedIn, and it was so inspiring and so informative. And you share that you were first diagnosed with scoliosis as a young girl. That had to be very traumatic for you. And as you continue to grow and experienced a great deal of pain and anxiety, which led to depression. So can you tell us about that time and how you felt? And you had to be afraid, and I imagine you felt very alone.
Yes. So, I don't know if I mentioned on the video, probably not, because it was, I call it my Eat Your Hollywood story, the 5-minute version. And so the one other piece of that is that my sister also has scoliosis. We like to race under the team name of Twisted Sisters, but she was diagnosed. That was my niece's recommendation. She was diagnosed before I was, which is how I ended up, starting to be followed as well. And so, I think what was scary about that for me is that she had her spine surgery very young. And so for me, I didn't know if that diagnosis meant I was also going to have that surgery. So it was, I was wasn't alone in it because we were in it together, but still also felt like a lonely time, if that makes sense. And, the diagnosis, scoliosis by definition is a deformity. And I know I shared that in that video. Deformity to most people sounds awful, right? Like if you look up, synonyms for deformity, it's, ugly and disgusting and gross. And nobody wants to hear that, especially not a young girl. So it was really scary. I think at that time started to have the first inklings of being, ashamed of my body. And then fast forward a couple of years, I was in a back brace, which they're a little bit better now than they were back then, but not a whole lot better. It kind of went from right underneath your kind of armpits to down below your hips. And so it's this hard plastic shell. That definitely is one of the things that started a spiral of depression because I didn't want to leave the house with it on.
How old were you?
The deal was that I would not wear it to school, but then I had to come right home and put it on. And so that meant I was totally isolating myself from everyone other than, that little bit of time at school. That isolation along with the body image piece, I also think those came together to be a perfect storm with many other things to lead to the eating disorder as well.
Okay. How old were you when you were diagnosed?
I was diagnosed, it's funny. I still have all those medical records. I think I was diagnosed, I want to say probably 11. My curve was a little more significant when I was about 13. And that's when I was put in a back brace.
Okay.
Tamie, I'm learning more about you. I know a little bit about your journey, but this is just great. My question is, subsequently, you developed some coping mechanisms that must have smoothed some of the emotional and physical pain for a while. Can you tell us about what they were and when you and your family decided that maybe a little help was needed?
I think by the time we decided I needed help, a lot of help was needed. Back then, nobody really talked about eating disorders. And so, fast forward, I didn't even know I had an eating disorder until I went away to college. So, we, of course, we all know this, not everyone with an eating disorder is a lower BMI. But I was during those, junior high and high school years. So I was a lower weight. I was isolating. I was depressed. Towards the end of high school, that's when I started to drink. I still was that quote, a good kid. I didn't really get in trouble, but I discovered that, when I drank that I didn't feel ugly. I didn't feel like a nerd. I felt like I fit in and could have fun. So I, started to develop those, I'd say definitely the restricting and the disordered eating, and that I would say somewhere between 12 and 14, but probably younger than that. And then the drinking, towards the, I'd say 15, 16. But it really wasn't until I went to college that I even kind of understood what an eating disorder was. And a good friend of mine told me she was worried about me. And so I, said maybe I should do something about this. So the first time I sought treatment, I want to say I was 19. And I, insurance, right? We can all talk about insurance all day long, but it's a little bit better today, obviously, as far as coverage. But for me back then, it was really, it was like a PHP stay for 2 weeks and then maybe a couple weeks in residential. So treatment had so many limits back then. So it was kind of that bouncing back and forth between, eating disorder and depression and drinking and all of it, as we know, kind of goes together.
That was a really good friend,
Yeah, it was a really good friend. And there's another good friend of mine that I grew up with who, and we've talked about it. Actually, recently we talked about it when I saw her. And she used to go home and tell her parents that she was afraid that something was going to happen to me because I was so thin, which, and I just, it breaks my heart to hear that and to know that, she carried that and she was so worried about that. And I, and so we talk a lot about where I am now and what I, now that I get, the privilege of trying to help others, with this, but, really good friends. And again, really hard to carry that as a friend.
Yeah.
How long did you struggle before you? started?
Before I sought help? I'd have to say, again, because estimating, I'd say maybe 5 or 6 years.
Okay.
Before I got help. And I, going back to my sobriety, it was when I went to eating disorder treatment for the first time, they sent me to my first 12-step meeting. And I was like, I don't want to go, but I'll go because then I get a break from this place for a couple hours. So, it was kind of, and so in that journey, I realized that I was able to stop a lot of the behaviors that I was engaging in. Not all of them, but definitely a lot more of them. But it wasn't until I got sober and stayed sober that I was really able to fully recover. So I always estimate, if I'm 25 years sober, and then I call it 20 years recovered from my eating disorder, because it really took that, handful of years to, I went back to IOP at that time. I did a lot of therapy. We still do therapy, right? But,
right. And for people listening who might not know, PHP is partial hospitalization program, and IOP is inpatient.
Intensive outpatient.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. And sometimes PHP is called day treatment. So it's kind of the same thing. Sometimes it's 5 days a week. Some places have 7 days a week. It usually includes, a couple of meals, several group sessions, individual therapy 2 to 3 times a week. Also, seeing a dietitian, psychiatry, a really full, comprehensive team.
So you also had to struggle with, I'm sure, anxiety and depression, along with physical pain and the eating disorder. It's never, when people develop a coping mechanism like alcohol use or any coping mechanism, really, it's really just masking something else, right? If it becomes a problem, it's something that kind of numbs those feelings. And I think that until you really get into some therapy, most people don't realize where this stuff begins.
100%. I definitely struggled a lot with anxiety and depression. And, depression, honestly is something that I've struggled with, throughout my adult life. It's never taken me to the places where it did before. It has never led me back to, eating disorder or substances of any kind, but it's definitely something that, I have had to continue to manage. One thing I did learn, though, is once I, got sober and went back for some treatment and more intensive therapy, I learned that I had PTSD, and that was something I probably would have never figured out had I continued to drink or engage in symptoms. And, it was, that was really eye-opening. The therapist at the time, and I ended up working with her for years after that, actually. She sat down with me with the DSM. I'm looking to see, I don't have one on my shelf, but that's the diagnostics manual that we use. It's not over here. And she showed me the definition of PTSD. And then for reading it, I was like, oh, I have that one and that one. And it just started to make sense. Okay, so I'm not crazy. We don't like to use that word, but I felt like I was crazy. I'm not crazy. This is a real thing that I have. And labels are tricky in our field, right? Because they can make somebody feel bad about themselves. But also for me, what it did was it almost felt like a relief, because there was a name to what was wrong with me. And that meant I could work on it. If I had no idea it was wrong, I didn't know how to work on it. So having that diagnosis and then having a different direction and type of therapy really made a difference for me.
And so now you're living in recovery from your eating disorder, and you just celebrated 25 years sober a few months ago. Yeah. Those are incredible feats, and congratulations. Most people also, unless you've walked any walk, you really don't realize how hard it is to recover or be in recovery or even working at recovery sometimes. But people also don't realize that a large percentage of people with eating disorders also have substance or alcohol use disorder. Can you tell us about the correlation, being that you're a therapist and you can speak to this from all different angles, and that's beautiful.
From all angles. Yeah, I'd say, the statistic, is that about 50% of those with eating disorders have some type of substance or alcohol use disorder. And it really makes sense, I'd say, from the non-clinical me. I used to always say I have this disease of doing anything not to feel, right? Anything, although I never got into gambling, joke about that, but, anything not to feel, whether it was disordered eating, if it was spending too much money, if it was, alcohol use, it was really just the goal for me was just not to feel anything. And so I think that's what happens with, a lot of people with eating disorders have trauma. I think now our field has evolved. So we really know that it's a significant percentage. And so, with trauma and trying to manage those feelings that are confusing, that are scary, that are overwhelming, if I am not allowed to restrict or engage in any of my eating disorder symptoms, then I'm going to use this other thing to manage how I feel. And a lot of times, most times it's not a choice, right? It's just, okay, well, I'm not drinking anymore. I'm sober, but, I'm going to go back to doing this thing I was doing over here with my food because I can't stand how I feel. And that's, we call it like the whack-a-mole effect, right? Is kind of one thing managing with one thing or the other until you really start to learn how to cope. And, I always say nothing will work like your eating disorder worked. Nothing will. I would say it works until it didn't work, right? It didn't work after a long time, but it worked for a long time. And so, it stopped working, but I didn't have anything else yet. So there's this period of time where feels like you're never going to get to see the light at the end of the tunnel because, I know that if I drank, this is how I didn't have to think about anything. I would wake up the next day feeling worse than I did before I drank, though. And if I engaged in my eating disorder, I didn't have to feel. So I had to learn a lot of different coping skills to try to manage those emotions as I was trying to deal with trauma in order to come out the other side. And so, as you dig into those past traumas, whatever they are, it's so easy for anyone to slip back into those behaviors because it's so hard to face. And so I think that's why it's kind of that, I did work in the substance use field for a little bit. And, I would often have clients coming in saying, I used to have an eating disorder like a few months ago, because if they were really actively engaged in their addiction, they didn't necessarily need their eating disorder at that time. And then they come into treatment and all of a sudden they're engaging in behaviors. Well, of course they are because they don't have their substance to go to. So they need their eating disorder at that time. So it's, how do we arrest both of them at the same time so that you have the opportunity to work through this stuff so that you can get to the other side?
That was beautifully explained because it made so much sense. And I loved it.
You used the term whack-a-mole, and I can't remember which podcast it was. It was one recently we did this year, and there was somebody else used that same whack-a-mole because you knock one thing down and you got this other thing to deal with, and you knock
perfect,
that down.
Right?
Yeah, it's
perfect.
Yeah, there's no other description for it, really, right?
No, yeah. So you eventually became a marriage and family therapist, and you specialized in addiction, eating disorders, and trauma. So how did your illness factor into this decision? And the other thing is that teletherapy now is so widely accepted and it's exploded and probably is going to continue to be a major source of therapy. So what's your thoughts on this and how do you envision the future for mental health?
Yeah. So when I graduated college, to take a step back, so I was in the mortgage business. It was really one of those, like, I don't know what I want to do with my life. A bunch of my friends are doing this. I was supposed to go to law school and didn't want to go to. So I was in that field for almost 10 years, and that was kind of getting well into my years of recovery, sobriety, and my eating disorder. And I found myself, doing eating disorders awareness events, and I started volunteering to do some. ANAD is an organization that supports free support groups, and so I started leading some of those. And I was like, I think it's time for me to do something with this because this is really where my heart is. And not everyone who's recovered feels like called to do this type of work, but it definitely that's what it was for me. And so I was living in California at the time, and I know that I'm sure Carolyn Costin, but For those of you listening that don't know Carolyn Costin, she's really one of the pioneers in the eating disorder treatment field. And the program she found in Montanito is in California. And so when I moved there, I went to her study groups that she used to have for anyone could go to, a student, doctor, whoever. And so I showed up and started going to these study groups to learn. And then I said, okay, it's time for me to go to school. So I went to grad school in Santa Barbara at Antioch. And when it was time for my internship, although in California as an MFT, they call you an MFT trainee, I worked at Montanito with Carolyn and the group there, and was so fortunate to learn. So I believe that anyone who wants to work in the eating disorder field, the best way to do it is to work in a program of some kind, whether it's residential treatment center, inpatient, outpatient, but to really, learn under some people who've been in the field for a long time. So that was kind of my entrance into the field. And I always say, I feel like I'm one of the lucky ones, right? That I got to, when I started in the field 15 years ago, the people that I got to work under and learn from was just incredible. And, I moved back to the East Coast and went to start an ANAG group in South Jersey, where I grew up. And within a few weeks, a bunch of people wanted to see me individually because that resource was lacking. There really weren't many. There actually still aren't a lot in South Jersey, although there are more now than there were. And so it kind of just expanded from there. It wasn't necessarily my goal to come back to the East Coast and start a practice. It just kind of evolved. I worked for other treatment programs, doing utilization review, and then again, substance use field. And then, I was at Montanito for another about 6.5 years, I think. So it's been a pretty amazing journey in the field. And, after, I can't say that yet because Ellen hasn't said how we met, but we'll get there. I won't go to say those things yet. So it's been a pretty amazing journey. And I'd say, to answer the other part of your question about telehealth, I will be honest with, I don't like doing it myself when I go to my own personal therapy. It's so funny because I'm just, I prefer in person. However, we started to do alumni groups and things, telehealth over early pandemic. And of course, now we see this whole other side of our field emerging. What I love about it is, if I'm doing a group, I can still see everyone's faces. It's not very different than sitting around a room together. I love that there's access to care that people would not have had. Somebody that lives in the middle of nowhere can access group and treatment and most levels of care, obviously not residential, but there's so many offerings now. And that's, I say, really a big silver lining of this, right? The last couple of years. Is that really that access to care that's there? And, one of the things we did lobby for was, that telehealth to be covered. And so the goal being that it will continue to be covered. I think there's been plenty of research that's been done and continues to be done about the efficacy of telehealth. And it works. And,
may draw some people out that feel it's a safer place for them to be sitting at their house and
at least to start that way. Yeah. Okay,
yeah, absolutely. Safer. And then also, there's definitely, there's a lot of clients that are older, like our, older client that has, a family and can't really leave home. Obviously there's times when that person needs to leave home for that level of care. But somebody like that who traditionally say, I can't go to day treatment or PHP or IOP, they can if they can do it from home. Mm-hmm. And so it's definitely created access to a whole other group of client that might not have been able to go to treatment.
Okay, now it's time. Put on your seatbelt.
I'm going to cry, Ellen.
No, we're not. We're going to hold it together. I'm so excited to share how I met Tamie because it's an incredible story. So I met Tamie following my daughter Katie's death from anorexia in 2013. Tamie was her counselor. That's what you would say. You were her counselor during the last year of her life. Tamie was someone, she finally connected to, after over a year of me trying to convince Katie that she needed to connect. She needed to connect with a team, a counselor, a doctor, a dietitian. And I believe she finally did. She connected with Tamie, and she also had a doctor that she was connected with. So Katie worked at JP Morgan Chase as a project manager in the card division, and a memorial was held at her work site, which is where I met Tamie for the very first time. I knew she existed. I knew she had a wonderful impact on Katie, but we had just never met. We had an instant connection, a connection of grief, loss, and love. We both knew life was going to be different without our Katie. Of course, Katie would not allow me to communicate with Tamie.
Well, that was her eating disorder, though.
Exactly. True. Or know anything more than Tamie. So Tamie was this mystical creature who had entered Katie's life, and it was amazing. But Katie had a wall of steel in place. I remember the first day Katie went to see Tamie. I talked with her the entire time she was driving until she got to the door. She was nervous. She finally had done this, and it was a big step. Tamie was one of those angels who enters your life. Tamie and I have stayed connected over the past 9 years. Nita walks, lobbying in D.C., and any other opportunity we had to connect. And so, of course, when we started planning the podcast, I was like, I know someone we gotta talk to. So here we go. My question for you is, what advice do you have for parents or loved ones who are struggling to support someone with an eating disorder? It's just so scary. And often the eating disorder is entrenched before you even realize there's something really going on. So what can you help?
Well, first of all, before I respond to that, I want to respond to everything you just said. Alan, it's been such a gift to know you and have known you for all these years. I can't believe it's been 9 years already. And I will say, I remember I'd sent an email to Katie's doctor, and she was so mad. And you'd sent an email at the same time too. Her eating disorder was so strong, but it was such an honor to know this amazing, bright young woman. And, when somebody comes into as an outpatient therapist, when somebody comes into your office that, really, really needs treatment, a lot of times they just say, like, you know what, go to this higher level of care and then come back to me and we'll talk. And it's a rare occasion. And I can think of one other person who actually just became a doctor. There was one other person that came to me whose symptoms were very severe. And I was honest with her and said, I'll continue to see you, but my goal is that you're going to need to go to treatment, because this, the cycle that this woman was in would not have been stopped without treatment. And the same, with Katie, where she was would not have been interrupted without treatment. But there was something about her that I just really felt connected as well. And like I needed to connect with her, and I wanted to spend that time with her and get to know her and not be the one to say, you need to go to treatment first. I mean, we got there, right? But there was just something really so special about Katie. This, but it was such an honor to know her and to have her trust me. I mean, it's honor when somebody really trusts you in that way. And I think I remember when I met you, you had just gotten your tattoo on your arm of Katie's words. And I'd just gotten this one. You guys can see.
Yes.
Because I felt like I needed to do something, because knowing Katie and losing Katie also changed my life, and in a thousand different ways, and in so many in some of them, the great ways, right, of being with you and you saying like, do you want to go to DC? I'm going to Washington, DC to do this advocacy thing. I'm like, sure, sign me up. And so, my life has changed a lot, for the better. And I always say this, not a day goes by that I don't think of Katie, and I'm obviously, you feel the same, but, so I just really wanted to say that, and honor that and honor her.
And you were the fact that she was seeing someone literally after over a year and a half of saying, Kate, and I would get the, oh yeah, Mom, I've talked to somebody. Oh yeah, I'm seeing a dietitian, which I knew that was the eating disorder saying, oh, I'm doing exactly what I need to do. So yes, hugs and so much love for you.
So much love for you too. So to answer your question, and I'm actually have been talking with a close friend of mine whose daughter's really in it. So I might connect him with you guys too.
Please
the
do.
first thing that comes to mind, in talking to families is, I think it's so normal to go right to like, what did I do wrong? And how is this my fault? And I think it's always, for me, it's really important to just kind of reinforce that, like the eating disorder isn't born out of fault on the parent's side, right? It's something that, I think it's really important that you didn't do anything wrong. You're doing everything you can. Everyone comes from very different family backgrounds, but there's no blame placed with the parent. And, for me, my goal is to really be an advocate and support. It's a really scary process, and there's a lot of different outcomes, right, as we know. So I think continue to say, and this is what I said to my friend yesterday, is, we're just going to keep trying, right? Like this treatment didn't work. This treatment center didn't work. We're going to keep trying, and that's like, you can fall apart and be upset, and I'm going to keep fighting and trying. And be there for you. So I guess to parents is, you need your own support. And I can't stress that enough. Like, and there's this, I think a lot of parents say, well, there's so much money that I'm spending on treatment, or I'm taking them to their appointments. I don't have time to do my own. And that self-care as a parent is critical. You have to take care of yourself, and that there's no guarantees, and that everybody's treatment looks different, right? We know that some people go to treatment once, and some people go to treatment 15 times. I don't know how many times I went to treatment. I went to treatment a handful of times. One of those times was rehab. I remember the insurance company saying, Tamie, didn't you just go to eating disorder treatment a few months ago? I was like, yeah, I have this too,
Yeah.
So that everyone's, to connect with parents. I think there's a lot more parent support than there used to be. We always need more, right? But there's definitely a lot more out there.
I think that piece of finding community, like connecting with people who you can say, what the heck?
Oh, that sense of community.
People who understand, people that have been there or are there. Yeah. I mean, it's just
whatever you're going through.
Yeah.
That sense of community, and that somebody really gets it. And, a lot of people are compassionate, and that's great too. You need that. But you also need a village of people who you can let your hair down and
no judgment.
Yeah, just let it go. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no judgment, and say like, I'm really scared. I don't know what to do here.
Yes, because sometimes you have to keep it together for everybody else, but you need a place to. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Tamie, we know it takes a very special person to become a therapist, and there's no doubt that you have positively and compassionately impacted so many lives right here. Ellen has told me so much about you. I met you once before this, just briefly, but I was so excited to meet you. And I know Katie was a wonderful girl, and obviously she had a great therapist. She just had an awful disease. And I know that our daughter's therapist, and her eating disorder therapist and her regular therapist, we just hold in the highest esteem in our hearts, because you do things as therapists that we can't do sometimes as parents because we're too close and they don't share everything with us. And it's a very, very sacred space. And I just want to thank you for all the years that you've done that and all the people that you've helped.
And I want to thank you for doing it from the heart, because that's what you said. That's why you got into this, is from the heart. And that's why you're so good at what you do.
Thank you. Thank you. And I, in this field, I'll never forget, Nora was one of my clinical supervisors. And, I was still in school when I started at Montanito. And I remember her saying to me, all the stuff you learned in school about boundaries and stuff, well, that doesn't really work here, right? And it doesn't mean we don't need to have professional boundaries, right? But what it meant, what she meant and what it means to me is that we heal in relationships with other people, especially with eating disorders. We can't heal without having that relationship. And so it means that, right? It's, and I remember when I first was in treatment, I was angry. And I was like, you're only being nice to me because I'm paying you. And I'm sure that many therapists have heard that before. Like, you don't really care about me. And I know from sitting on the other side of in the other chair, right, that's not true, that it really is, true compassion and caring for someone. And, especially as you work with somebody longer term outpatient, and like I got to do with Katie, really develop, a lot of fondness and caring for somebody. And it's, again, that honor to be able to be in that space with someone and have that trust. And it is hard.
So your line of work is a little different now. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So, I have to say, looking back, Ellen, part of the things that we had done together is really what led me to this other side of the field. I still do quite a bit of coaching with former clients that come back to me and they want to get together. I'm like, we do some coaching work and things, and I do some support groups. But my time that I just spent at Montanito for 6.5 years was in outreach, and outreach is an interesting side of the field because for me, I see outreach as connecting everybody, right? I want to connect people to resources. I want to make sure everyone is as educated as they can be about eating disorders and treatment. I want to meet with the outpatient therapist and dietitian to see if I want to refer clients to them, right? That's important too, because, you might need that higher level of care, but we need the right outpatient providers for you. And so outreach means a lot of different things, and doing things in the community. So one of the things that led me to that was, I loved doing the advocacy. I loved doing that. I was the Need a Walk coordinator for that Westchester walk for about 5 years. There's 1,000 moving parts, and I loved it. Our congressman used to come. Ellen spoke one year. And so it just was, I really loved being in the community so much. So the outreach position really just felt like a great fit for me. And I still got to be clinical. I'm having clinical conversations with families and providers all the time. So I'm still getting to use my clinical skills, but just on this other side of it, which is really cool. My current role, it's my title is Director of Field Marketing and Events, which means 1,000 different things, but essentially, in charge of our webinars, so that educational piece that's so important to me. Sponsorships. I know we have a conference coming up again next year, right? When are we doing that? So sponsorships and conferences, provider visits, having people see our programs. That's something I've always really loved, because you need to need to see a program to feel comfortable enough to send your family or your client there. So I'm continuing this work, in this new program now, which I really enjoy. So. And
you're in New Jersey?
No, I live in Pennsylvania now. I grew up in South Jersey, so I'm a Jersey girl. Okay. Always a Jersey girl at heart, which is scary to some people, but Jersey girl. But I live in Pennsylvania, so my family's still in Jersey, so I'm there often.
So I know that at some point you had spinal fusion, and that have some limitations from that, but you're doing some amazing things that you're going to be sharing with our listeners. And I know you're extremely involved in advances in treatment for scoliosis, and you need to educate us about that, where you are in regard to your scoliosis, and tell us about your advocacy and your racing That was interesting when I saw racing. I said, what kind of racing is she doing?
He thought you were a race car driver.
Oh, no. Oh, my gosh. That would probably not be good for my back. That might be one thing my doctor says no to. So I'll say this, before my surgeries, so probably about, I want to say 8 years or so ago, my sister was involved in triathlon. She still is. And when we were kids, they kind of discouraged exercise in kids with scoliosis. And so when she started doing, running and doing triathlon, I'm like, we can do that. I didn't know we could do that. And so, I signed up for my first 5K. I think that was 2014, and got involved in triathlon. I learned how to, Ellen, as a swim by watching YouTube videos on how to breaststroke. And then
Tamie,
somebody said, you might want to take a...
Say that again. Tamie did not know how to swim. And she learned how to swim, and now she swims in open water miles. You're Wonder Woman.
I'm taking an open water. I'm taking a swimming break because my neck is not happy with me right now. But I actually this is not far from you. I swam a 10K in the Hudson down. It was downriver, so it was with the current. It was still 2 hours, but
oh my God.
So yeah, I learned how to swim, and then I started taking lessons, obviously. And so being in open water is something that I always love. It's really peaceful and grounding for me. A lot of people have fear of open water, but for me, it just feels really peaceful. So where I am now, I'm a little bit more than 3.5 years post-op. So I had 3 surgeries over 2 separate days to correct my spine. So I have my scoliosis, and then as you age, right? Everyone's spine degenerates as they age. But if you have a curved spine, mostly lumbar curve, as you age, then I started having a lot of disc problems. So I had disc surgery when I was 26 and one when I was 30. And by the time we were at the point where I might need surgery, they were so degenerated, it was really just vertebrae, bone on bone. And I'd lost feeling in my left foot, and I would trip when I walked. And so, I'd seen different doctors over the years. I love my doctor, the one you saw in the video, because he took a lot of time with me to plan out surgery and to come up with a plan that was best for me. They don't typically do the surgery in the 40s. It just is kind of what happened as far as what my body was doing at this age. So I was 43. And so he went in through my stomach and my ribs on day 1. And then 2 days later, my spine fused T10 to S1, which is, a good amount of your spine fused. So, it was a long recovery. I had a really amazing physical therapist. I'm a big proponent of PT. I said, even when they tell you you're done, go back, and I will continue to go back because I believe that's part of why I was able to get so much stronger. And so now, and I say the caveat of this is my doctor knows all the crazy things that I do. And so I do obstacle course races. So Spartan races, Savage, was a whole thing. I train at this really cool gym in Lancaster, PA, called the Empowered Obstacle Barn, which is literally a barn with obstacles. And the coaches are really amazing. And the owner of the gym, he gets my spine, and if there's something that I'm like, I don't know how to do this, then we figure it out together. So it's been a really cool journey. And I love the community. Everyone just has different backgrounds and different reasons why they're doing it. So I do that. And I did my first half marathon in the end of April in Brooklyn.
Oh my God.
Which is something I never would have conceived of. And so, of course, cried at the end. And as soon as I texted my doctor and my physical therapist to let them know. And I'd even reached out beforehand and said, I think I want to do this thing, but I don't know. They're like, just listen to your body. And that's what I do. So it's quite amazing, how you mentioned resilience earlier on, and it's amazing how resilient our bodies are. It's our mind that gets in the way most of the time. So, early on, and I'll have to send you this link to this little webinar I did, but early on, probably about 5-6 months after surgery, I started having like mood swings, and I was anxious and I was angry. And for whatever reason, there's the statistic is about 20% of people that have a lumbar spine fusion, developed PTSD symptoms. Who knew? Because I was like, this feels a little familiar. So I went back to therapy, and my physical therapist helped a lot with the emotional part of it as well. But one thing that came up was, body image is an interesting thing, right? Because when you have a surgery like that, I have, 2 feet of scars now, and my body looks totally different than it did. I had this hump on my back that's not there, but it didn't feel like my body anymore. So it's a body image disturbance instead of a body image distortion, because my body did change in that way. And people don't really talk about that. It happens. I think it happens to women all the time, right? You get pregnant, you have a baby, your body's changed. So it's not a distortion. It really is a disturbance because your body has changed. And so funny thing is the first therapist I went to because she worked at the rehab hospital where I did my PT. And she made, I mentioned the scar on my stomach healed very poorly. I had to have a bunch of treatments to it. So I was very self-conscious of it. And of course, of my, shape being different. And she would make kind of inappropriate comments about, you look like this kind of whatever athletic model or something. I was like, that's not really appropriate, but we'll bring it up next time. And she made a similar comment. And so I decided I'm not going to see her anymore. And her voicemail was full. So I sent her an email explaining why. And she wrote back and said, I'll keep that in mind if I work with anyone that has a body image issue again. I was like, oh no. I just seriously wrote her an email back. Because, they deal with, amputees there. I mean, everybody has that body image disturbance. So it was a really interesting time for me to have to work through that in a different way. And so, 3.5 years later, I think part of how I honor this new body is by trying these different things. And one of the things I love about the obstacle course races, I feel like it's really similar to kind of when we were kids and we played. I get dirty and climb on things and have calluses on my hands and bruises on my knees all the time. But there's just something really grounding and fun about it.
Oh, that's great. Fantastic. You can do that. Can you tell us a little bit about your advocacy for?
Yes. So I joined to the board of SOSORT is they don't have any patients that are on their board. They're all medical professionals, all doctors, physical therapists. And so it was important for me to get involved to give kind of voice to people like me, right, that really have experienced, the struggles that we see people experience with eating disorders and trying to get treatment. It's really the same thing, like finding the right care, whether it's, getting your insurance to cover enough physical therapy or, the commonality of struggling with mental health, whether it's because of your pain, having surgery, not having the right kind of support around surgery. So I think I sent you the links, Linda, to the Facebook and Instagram pages I created. I really created them, the Scoliosis Swimmer, really with the intention of people are probably sick of me seeing posts about swimming and scoliosis. So I'll create this page. But really what it has done is opened the door for me to connect with other people. And I've gotten to meet with people before they've had surgery and be a support and, sometimes go to the hospital and sit with somebody after they've had surgery, because the emotional support around this is such a big deal that I want to make sure that doctors are more aware of it and educate the medical professionals, and also just being there as that support to people that are going through it. There's more support now than there used to be. They have this, it's funny, it's called Curvy Girls. Hopefully they'll do something. There's definitely more girls and boys with scoliosis, but so there's more support than there used to be, but there really still isn't very much. So, I'm working to kind of increase awareness and support for those that have it. The statistic is 1 in 40, which is a big number. That's a significant amount of people that have it. It's a smaller percentage that has to have the spine fusions, but still there's a lot of us. And the outcomes are very different. I'm very fortunate with the outcome that I've had. I don't take anything I do as far as sports go for granted, because I know that I might not always be able to do that. So I'm really, and that's, so this month this is Scoliosis Awareness Month right now. And I'm raising money from one of the organizations. And I kind of dedicate like a race. Like I sign up, I'm going to one tomorrow. I easily talk myself into races, or it's like this. A friend says, hey, there's this race. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to sign up. So I have one tomorrow, one next weekend.
So Scoliosis Awareness Month is always in June, because this is probably just going to be later.
Yes.
But yes. Well,
yeah, it was going to come out later, but it's always in June.
Yes. Well, that's good
so
to
I was
know.
trying to.
There's nobody better to support somebody that's had the lived experience. I mean, there's physicians out there and they do their job, but the person with lived experience is the best counselor. So I have to ask you, when you swim in the Hudson, because I'm a person that can't get into water that's less than 90 degrees, what's the temperature in these open waters?
It depends. I think that swim was in the beginning of September, so it was probably upper 70s. Oh. And that's really, you don't want it to be any warmer than that, because when you're swimming for a long time, you will overheat. So I have done some cold water swimming. I haven't done it recently, but, so the coldest swim I've done is, I think, 38 degrees.
Oh.
I haven't done that for a couple years, but, I'd say low 70s, upper 60s to low 70s is good if you want to swim any kind of distance.
Okay.
Give it a try.
You're an amazing person. What you've overcome and what you're doing. It's amazing.
Well, I hope you get back up this way again sometime soon, a conference or something, because I'd like to stay friends.
Absolutely. Well, again, let me know when the next thing is, and I will be there.
Great.
Yeah. There's something will be happening, Tamie.
I know, and I will be there.
Yeah. Okay. Just a quick note. Links for today's show are on our show notes. And then, Tamie, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners, or anything else you want to leave us with? This has been awesome. It's been awesome. Thank you so much for giving me the time to share my story and all the parts of it. When I got that video and I said, we can talk about my spine fusion, but really we need to talk about the mental health piece of it, because that impacts everything. Mm-hmm. And so, I think what I would want to leave everyone with is that, that hope piece. I know it sounds cheesy sometimes, but, the having hope goes a long way. And that resilience of just continuing to go no matter what. Like after surgery, when I was kind of relearning to walk again, I don't like to exercise. That's why I sign up for races, because I like to train for things. It gives me a goal. So I would turn on my watch when I was going through for my walk with my walker, and I would act like I was training for a race. I was training for life, right? So just that, having that hope that it's always, it can get better. That's one thing that kept me going. And then being able to, I always knew in my heart that I was experiencing these things because I was going to be able to help others with it. I didn't know exactly what that would look like. And so I like to look at things through that lens as well. Even, as recent as my spine fusion, right? I've been able to take that and help others with it. And that's exactly what you've done, right? Take your experience, and you've been able to help so many with it. So just to kind of hold on to that hope, reach out to people that have been there before you, because that's why we're here. We're here for that.
Mm-hmm. We're here to support each other.
Yeah. Always.
So thank you so much, Tamie. This has been wonderful. And thank my co-host too. We're all the wind beneath each other's wings. Where have I heard that before, right? Thank you so much. And I want to thank you, listeners. You're the best. Please help us get the word out about Once Shattered, picking up the pieces, because everybody's mental health matters. Tell your friends, share this podcast, rate and review on the platform you're listening to us on. This has been awesome. Love you so much, Tamie. I'm sending you hugs through the airwaves. Love you.
So again, Tamie, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. And as always, we couldn't do this without Rockbox Recording and Production and our wonderful sound engineer and producer, Scott Fitzgerald, for making us sound good. He's expertly producing our podcast and so much more. This is the place if you need to do your podcast, record an audiobook, do a legacy cast for your loved ones, this is the place to do it. Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for listening.
Thank you, Tamie.